think the strongest case, I'm totally opposed to all this, has been made on this program by you, and we've made it many, many times. This is about entrenching race in the Constitution that used to be called apartheid. And any sensible person would say this is not the way to go about things. But as I've said many times, Daniel, I mean, they've got 11 people. The Aboriginal Australians have got 11 members of the National Parliament. That's 4.8% of the National Parliament. If you take 4.8% of the Australian population, you get well over 1 million. And on the latest census, there are not 1 million people identifying as Aboriginal in this country. So you could make a case to say they're already overrepresented. But then you've got this $75 million, again, taxpayers' money, to start setting up the referendum. But there are no details of the voice to Parliament.
Well, that's right, Alan. There are no details, only very vague wording that has so far been put forward by Anthony Albanese at the Garma Festival earlier this year. And the other issue is it's not just about the voice. You know, the voice is just the beginning. Yeah. As you rightly noted a moment ago, Alan, it's the voice, and then it's what they call Marikata, which is so-called truth-telling, which means rewriting Australian history. And then it's a treaty with our own nation. So that's the agenda of the Albanese government. So people might think, well, if we say yes, we're saying yes to a fair go for Indigenous Australians, and that'll be the end of it. Well, no, it's not the end. It's the beginning of a fundamental dismantling of our democracy, of our way of life, of our history, and of our culture. And it's important that Australians understand what this means and just how radical a voice to Parliament will be.
Well, I mean, you talk about dismantling history. Now, I've let this pass, but there is a time, surely, in the immediate future when we've got to talk about or question the legitimacy of talking about First Nations. Now, no entity can be a nation without a government and a language. And with due respect to our Aboriginal community and all of those people who've been here before white settlement, they were never a nation. They never had a single language. And that's why a voice to the Parliament cannot have legitimacy. Which voice is it speaking for?
Well, that's right, Alan. And in addition to that point, Indigenous Australians are individuals just as non-Indigenous Australians are. I mean, you wouldn't think of having an Indian Australian voice to Parliament or a Chinese Australian voice to Parliament because we recognise that all Australians are individuals. We all have our own opinions.
Were you born in Australia?
I was born in Australia.
You're an Indigenous Australian.
And that's an important part of the debate, the definitional issue here
Absolutely.
of who is and who is not an Indigenous Australian. So, as you say, this is lacking in details and they're putting all this money behind the referendum, but we need to know what this will actually mean and who can participate in this voice, and we don't know that. The government will not come forward with the details.
Wasn't constitutional change based on race once called apartheid?
Well, what we know, Alan, is in 1967, Australians voted for the exact opposite of this.
Correct.
I mean, don't forget, this is one of the most monumental outcomes in our history, which is over 90% of Australians voted to remove references to race in the Constitution, to make our Constitution more colourblind and to make Australia more equal. Now the Voice is doing the exact opposite of that, which is to divide Australians by race, which undoes the legacy of 1967.